into the tall bracket of body image, should not be that concerned, but in the next couple of slides, should not be concerned about height, but in the next couple of slides, I've tried to put the evidence together that exists around the world, linking various forms of malnutrition and learning, using one or the other indicator. One more thing, when we say malnutrition, undernutrition of the indicators, of which the indicators I just mentioned, are one end of the spectrum. And while the other end of the spectrum is overnutrition. And many developing countries, India as well, we are dealing now increasingly with both the types of malnutrition, which is said the dual burden. So we are very now being referred to as the diabetes capital of the world. So it is both the spectrums of malnutrition that we are dealing with in terms of the nutrition arena. Malnutrition and learning, as I said, these, without going into all these studies, I've picked up some highlight points across the globe that have linked malnutrition to learning and school performance. Now, broadly, these have been categorized into two forms, the results. One are direct results of malnutrition on the child. So the child, it is the school readiness, the school participation, retention. And an anemic child is not able to retain what is being taught in the school, the school performance, all of that has been shown. There is research evidence that shows that malnutrition plays a part there. But there are another kind of influence, which is an indirect influence, which has also been categorized, and it has been shown that for a malnourished or a weak child or a weak baby who cries a lot, obviously who's irritable, the environment, the attitude of the caregivers obviously automatically changes, the attitude of the teacher obviously changes. So these are all indirect influences that malnutrition has in the learning environment of the child that eventually affect learning. There have been, again, research evidence on the nutrients. So protein, energy, iron, maternal iron deficiency. Again, there have been evidence on if the child was deficient in infancy or the mother was deficient, how it plays a role in the later school achievement, and not just school achievement, but in the economic market and labor market. Folate, B12, this is all published literature that supports the role of one or the other forms of malnutrition, nutrients in the later learning. Iodine is one very big, very significant nutrient in brain development, and zinc, again, there is evidence relating zinc to the learning levels. In all this evidence, the early years, the impact of insults on nutrition that could have in early years has been very well. So early years is a prominent period in the life cycle of the child when the nutritional deficiencies or insults could have an impressionable and often irreversible impact going further. So again, these are in early years bracket, the first 1,000 days, and up till the early, the whole spectrum up to 6 years or 8 years. There have been studies that have showed how the school achievement varies, or the children who were stunted, that is low for height for age at 5, how they perform, and what is the score, what is the deficit in the score of their maths tests, so on and so forth. So, and these are some more studies. I'm not getting into each and every one. I've just picked certain highlights where you'll see all over the world, there is research evidence that links malnutrition, undernutrition to the learning and school performance, if that were the indicator of learning. In this segment, since I have a nutrition background, and my nutrition background sees me in the organizations I have been associated with, that is Pratham and Asar Center, supporting the nutrition and health, how to address the nutrition and health agenda within the organizations in terms of research, in terms of programmatic, the programs that are run, and capacity building. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about the efforts and experiments. So some initially started as experiments, then they got concretized into efforts, and some are more concretized. But all this is based on the philosophy where the parent organizations, where they say community participation and understandable evidence for action. So how all this has been merged to bring in or to address the health and nutrition agenda within various efforts. So this is an RCT that is on in Odisha. I know there you'll know more about this and in much larger details about what the RCT is, what the pilot phase was in Cuttack slums, and what now the rural Odisha study, how it is playing out. But what essentially is happening here is there are weekly visits. Although the study focuses on stimulation activities for less than 3 with the caregivers, but in the weekly home visits or in the group activity sessions, there is this quick follow-up which directly flows from a quick tool or a battery of tools that are used by the local level volunteers to create the evidence on what did the child eat, was there any diarrhea episode, what was done. So it's like a follow-up of quick nutrition and health domains then and there in the home of the child, which is understood by the mother. So this is, and additionally, the nutrition support that is happening in this research, which is focused on stimulation, is there are focused nutrition sessions that are held, wherein the community comes together to cook, and just not cook, but to understand, and cook for their young kids, but to understand why they are using the ingredients they are using, why it is important to maintain hygienic conditions, so on and so forth. At Asar Center, all this, I must say, what is not that interesting, because the content of what of nutrition is required at what age is not new, but what is interesting is how it has been translated so that there is a use that is possible at various levels. So, for instance, there is a bouquet of this material and kit that has been formed together, which we call Kiran, but there are these counseling cards on various themes. There are these story cards that can be read by a child, or it can be read by the volunteer, or we have used them in capacity building workshops with college students, where they are given the basic concepts, not necessarily with the nutrition or health background, but they are given some basic concepts, and then they are put in the field and said, okay, you have to take a session, you have to assess how the child is doing. So all these assessments and activity cards and games, it has allowed somebody with no nutrition background or technical speciality to go and interact in the community, and very often the frontline workers is that profile. So to kind of go and interact in the community about the critical nutrition and health domains. And there is this audio, so somewhere this has been digitized in an experiment, and its laptop is put there wherever it is possible. So then there is a huge flurry of activity around the laptop just to understand, okay, what is it about the young child nutrition that is required to be done. Again, I know my colleagues, senior colleagues from Pratham, they are going to talk about the mother's engagement within Pratham programs, especially the preschool programs. But in some segments, what we have done is at Asar Center, we have devised a formalized kind of a course around that. For example, in Gujarat, the Balwadi or the preschool teachers have been enrolled in a course where formally the information sessions, the modules are shared with them, and then as a practical, we give them these reaching out handouts or activity cards or whatever is possible to go and take the sessions with the mothers of young children in the community. And at the end of it, we have kind of put an exam And it's like so we've kind of formalized it as a capacity building arm to kind of put in the nutrition and health agenda there. These are some pictures from Gujarat, Ahmedabad. Again, one interesting, this is a program called Pratham Open School Program, where the dropouts, girls who drop out at 8, they come back and they are kind of, they do class 10, and those, what was done was, those who had done class 10 were roped in and to kind of enroll into, again, a Kiran course or a micro course, and then the workshops were taken with them, and they went and they did the workshops with the mothers, and this was done in 22 blocks, and I hope it continues. These are some snippets from the action in the pose vertical. Again, in Delhi, the same thing. Balwadi teachers, the mentors have been taken are taking this as a course and doing all these activities there. These are snippets from the Delhi, from classroom sessions to field sessions. This is the last slide. Now, earlier this month, there was this Human Capital Summit that happened in Washington, where the president of World Bank quoted Martin Luther King, and he urged the urgency of having this early years agenda to be a struggle for our civilization, as every civilization in every era has. And then Nelson Mandela was quoted saying, "It always sounds impossible until it's done." So I would like to end this presentation on an optimistic note, thanking the organizers of this symposium for bringing everybody together, where there is a lot of knowledge sharing, a lot of experience sharing that happens, so that we take steps to make what seems impossible make possible. And when I say I have a background in nutrition, I know in the panel I'm the last person standing between you and lunch, food lunch. So with that, I'm biased towards food. So with that, I would like to wrap up this presentation, and thank you for being patient and listening. Thank you.
Smriti, you're not the last person. We have Euphrates, who has the hard job of discussing 4 quite different presentations, but ranging over many important things that I think need to come onto the table as we discuss this idea of whether schools are ready and children are ready for their next step. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Rukmini. I think it's been a very enriching presentation from all the panelists, extensive research that has been done, and really, really exciting to see the evidence that's coming on from different places or different states across the country. One of the things I would like to refer to Professor Berman, from Professor Berman's presentation, because I think he kind of facilitated the work that I'm going to do, in the sense that he laid out clearly a framework. And he talked of the life course approach, because here in this session, in this conference, I think we want to ensure that children have a foundation, and we want to enhance learning from the angle of school readiness. But he reminded us that it's a life course approach. It begins from conception and goes through adulthood, because in the various presentations that we've listened, and I would like to start from that conception to early years, I think it's been very useful to listen to you talk about nutrition and making the correlation between nutrition and learning, using evidence from deficiencies in iodine and zinc, and showing that correlation between nutrition and learning. So it clearly demonstrates that from 0 to 3, as Professor Berman clearly said, from the Lancet articles that are coming out. I mean, Lancet has been there from 2002, as I said, the different series that have actually focused on early childhood development, as it's understood globally, has emphasized on nutrition and emphasized on the 0 to 3 as that first window of opportunity in terms of supporting the child for better brain architectural development. Now, what kind of nutrition we provide also is important, and we'll see how that links up also for the different stages. I think moving on to this presentation, I'm not choosing this because you are the last person, but I thought it was a good starting point at least to begin to set the stage of that 0 to 3 and to show how holistic development and intersectoral approaches are quite crucial in terms of contributing to that holistic development, be it emotional, cognitive, social, and that foundations in terms of language development. And I think when our colleague was presenting also in terms of the school readiness from CECED, we were just chatting here, and it's like this longitudinal study that we have been privileged also to partner with the other organizations to do has been one of its kind in India to follow children over the years. And it's really insightful to see what the correlation is between the longitudinal study and the relationship between nutritional status, the understanding of parents or caregivers, their own skills in terms of parenting, how it impacts the whole preparation that we have for school readiness. And it kind of ties in very well with, I think, some of the things that we talked about in terms of language. It's interesting, or it's no surprise, because when you look at the international evidence, it's clearly demonstrating, as the Indian research has proven, that improvement or children, investing in school readiness or early learning or creating that environment for children in those early years are crucial in terms of their preparedness, in terms of their interest, in terms of their participation, and in terms of their learning skills. So I think that evidence from India, which is homegrown, only corroborates that fact. And I think it's a really good that policymakers can take forward. And it was nice to have the chief minister here who is planning to use that evidence, taking it forward. Also, when we talked about the school readiness, looking at the learning levels for grade 6, 7, and 8, it was interesting to see that those children who were followed over the period performed better, in terms of their learning within the schools. And I'm just thinking that when we looked at the learning agenda or the presentation of the learning assessment for the country, I think our speaker who did that quite clearly told us that when we look across the country, the averages are almost the same. I think Kerala came out in terms of whether it was for grade 3, whether it was for grade 5, it came out as standing, making some progress, which was quite different. But then we had some other states, I think Bihar was mentioned, Chhattisgarh and the others, that still have a lot of work to do in terms of catch-up. I think it was really, really, refreshing for me to see that an equity perspective was taken in that analysis, in looking at, looking at it from a gender point of view, even though it wasn't quite clear whether there was much of a difference. The differences were quite marginal. It was also interesting to see that you looked at the urban-rural, and importantly, you were looking at the top 25 versus the last 25, which kind of corroborates also with what we heard from the readiness discussion, which clearly showed us that children who are coming from the most deprived communities, background, linguistic groups, are really at a disadvantage if this is not provided. So what stood out for me, I think, in all of this presentation is that I think you put it quite nicely in terms of saying that there's a nutritional crisis and there's a learning crisis. And when I remembered Professor Berman's map of the world, the countries that he showed in Africa, all the countries that had the red dots, have the highest levels of acute and severe malnutrition. So to be cognizant of the fact that nutrition is one of the factors and quite vital in the early years, it's really central. But I'm saying that for the generation of children that we have, I think hopes are not all lost, because newer evidence is coming and saying that there is a second chance, and adolescent education presents a second chance. One of the things that I think we need to look at as a piece. I think insightful also is the fact that you clearly mentioned that while we've done from a quantitative point of view, we kind of understand, we've taken the pulse, we know what the issues are, what the levels are. But I think we need to go back and revisit the qualitative aspect to see how are children learning in India, what are the misconceptions that are there, and how do we make a correlation to